Now let's move to our top Indiana story this week. Again, the reason why Indiana was the center of the political universe. And bear with me, I'm going to read for a little bit. So what played out in the Hoosier state this week was a rare, messy, and revealing crack in the machinery of Trump-era Republican control. It began quietly with Senate Republicans refusing to say out loud whether they would go along with this mid-decade congressional gerrymander demanded by President Trump, even as a committee dutifully advanced the bill. Now, by Tuesday, outside pressure groups ramped up on both sides. Fair Maps Indiana announced a pact to punish Republicans who complied with, well, Republicans who dissented, rather, from Trump, while the president himself escalated threats to primary anyone who didn't go along with his plan. By Wednesday, the focus shifted to the mechanics of power, the anonymous map drawers, the consultants, the backroom operators, underscoring how nakedly political the process had become. Thursday was the rupture, the vote. The Indiana Senate, in a stunning rebuke, rejected Trump's map outright, driven not by a sudden democratic awakening, but by personal history, institutional resentment, and a sense among some senators that they were being ordered, not persuaded. So, the Republicans who voted no justified their decision in human, relational, and institutional terms. Their language was grounded in lived experience. Jean Lysing talked about her grandson being targeted at school. Mike Bohacek spoke as a father of a child with Down syndrome, reacting to Trump's use of the R word. Greg Walker and Sue Glick described swatting threats and intimidation. Greg Good cited town halls, community cohesion, and fear of political violence spilling into Indiana. Even when they rejected Trump, they framed their resistance conservatively, right? Emphasizing precedent, conscience, and restraint, and the idea that power should not be exercised through bullying or fear. Okay, their rhetoric was defensive, not expansive. Don't escalate. Stop doing this. Don't reward threats. Don't import the national toxicity into Indiana. Now, by contrast, the Republicans who voted yes, like Liz Braun and Chris Garton, for example, made a fundamentally different argument on the Senate floor. They didn't center voters or families or communities. They centered power. Their speeches treated elections as hazards to be neutralized, demographic change as a threat, and partisan advantage as a justification into itself, right? Where the no voters spoke about intimidation as disqualifying, the yes voters spoke as if coercion were normal and necessary, right? Where the no voters rejected Trump's pressure as improper, the yes voters framed obedience to Trump's national project as a duty, right? That's the mask off moment right there. They're not supporting gerrymandering. They're openly articulating an authoritarian logic in which democratic processes exist to be managed, dissent is illegitimate, and permanent control is the goal. Now, Garden's speech in particular was scary. Like, I am literally afraid for the people in his orbit after listening to that man on Thursday. But what happened the next day makes clear that this push was not really a policy disagreement at all, but fundamentally a loyalty test. The language immediately shifted to retaliation, threats of primary challenges, warnings about federal funding being withheld from the state, and claims that Indiana had somehow declared war on the White House. Heritage Action, the group associated with Project 2025, suggested that roads wouldn't be paved and National Guard bases would be closed, crossing a line from hardball politics into something more like collective punishment. Now, Lieutenant Governor and attention whore Micah Beckwith grabbed the spotlight with what looked like an act of stochastic terrorism, accusing the senators who voted against Trump of having, quote, chosen dishonor, effectively declaring civil war inside his own caucus while sharing an image of the 21 dissenters that really eerily resembled a wanted poster. But yet, all that pressure ironically began claiming scalps not from the legislators targeted by the pedo-adjacent pastor, but from the pro-gerrymandering camp when the aforementioned Liz Braun resigned from Senate leadership. a tacit admission that the pro-map faction lost not just the vote, but its standing inside the chamber. Now, also Friday, in what may be an unrelated story, Governor Braun announced the appointment of Huntington Senator Andy Zay to the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission, removing another hardline Trump sycophant from the Senate entirely, creating a vacancy and a caucus vote in his district that will serve as a temperature check for who controls the Republican Party in Indiana going forward. So, will attempted governance, and again, make no mistake, like, these Republican lawmakers are still wrong on nearly every other issue. But will at least attempted governments rule the day, or will this aggressive grievance be the purview of the Indiana Republican Party going forward? So let's open this up to the floor and let this thing breathe a little bit. And Leslie, I haven't heard from you in a minute. What do you think?
Well, I went to Indianapolis on Monday and I gave my testimony and I addressed just about everything that you mentioned. And I wanted to appeal to the higher ideals and values of what it means to be a senator. I think that these threats of violence and retaliation are really, they're showing people's insecurity and their inability to persuade people of their actions. I've been very, very interested. I watched the Ken Burns American Revolution, and these people with their threats of violence are more like the British and the loyalists. And in fact, they are aligned with the oligarchy. They are not aligned with the people. And we need to give credit where credit is due. I applaud all the Republicans for voting no, because we can and we must come together and vote on our shared values. We are a state, and it's supposed to be state rights until it seems like the elite in DC want something, and then we're supposed to do what they want. But I think that Hoosiers know what they want. They want to govern themselves. And so I am hoping that this is the start of more partisanship on our shared values. But it is this violent rhetoric that is threatening our entire species globally. It is the violence. It is the violence of the words, the deeds, and the actions. And it is everything. It is the corporate, rapaciousness. It is the terrorism. These are all problems that are created by our own species. They do not solve any problems. They are not positive. They are just very negative. And it is going to take the cooler, calm, rational heads to come together, to put aside our differences and realize that we are in, I hesitate to use the fight, but it is a fight for our collective future. I mean, Chuck, you're very interested in water. And years ago, I worked as a recycling coordinator. And we've known for many, many, many years, we cannot live without clean water. And so these are our shared values that we really need to really just start coalescing around and forget about these culture wars that are just a mere distraction. And we can do this. The people can do this. And so, yes, I applaud all the Republicans for voting no. I called my senator, and in fact, I spoke to him personally a couple of months ago at Charbonneau, and I said, Ed, vote no. And, and I ran against him, and I am proud of him for voting no. And I called him on Friday, his office, and I said, please tell him that I said thank you for voting no. And that's what we all need to do. We need to call our Republican state senators and thank them for voting no. We should thank our Democratic ones as well. There's been no mention of the fact that all the Democrats were going to vote no matter what, right? But when people do the right thing, we need to thank them. And we need to continue to focus on our shared values to get us out of this mess that otherwise is just going to be more difficult to get out of.
Yeah. Well, speaking of this mess, Simon, let me ask. Obviously, this is a rebuke of President Trump, a rebuke of Mike Braun, who was a big supporter of this. He's threatening to support primary challenges as well now. Did have we reached peak Trump, peak Braun, peak Beckwith? God, please go away. Did the moderates stuff the Nazis into a locker, or does Beckwith's little terrorism gambit there turn up the temperature even further?
I'd say both are happening at the same time. The thing is that the pressure that came from the White House, because especially with the swatting and the threats, people are going to stand up for themselves and their families, no matter what. And the Republicans that have done that, I mean, should be applauded. We are seeing the cracks in the power that Trump can exercise. And I think this is one of the first places where I haven't been a fan of states' rights, but in this case, standing up to what is essentially a dictatorship, I think Indiana has succeeded on the national stage, saying, "Hey, no, we're our own people." I've got a quote here, which I actually keep on the front page of Organizing Indiana. And it's basically from Abraham Lincoln to the citizens of Indiana. And it says, "It is your business if the union of these states and the liberties of this people shall be lost. It is your business to rise up and preserve the union." And that was from a speech, February the 11th, 1861. And you can actually find the plaque outside the State House at 402 West Washington Street at Missouri Street. So, but basically, we have, a mandate there specifically for Indiana to stand up, to the federal government if it steps out of line, and it stepped out of line. So, and I mean, I think we've been fortunate with some of the people that we've got representing us, even if they are Republicans. Where on Org Day, everything was, they voted basically to close down and come back in January. And then, of course, that got changed. So on Org Day, I went up to Rod Bray, who's the president pro tem of the Senate, and basically said thank you and shook his hand. I got a momentary glimpse, into someone that was emotionally exhausted, and had been bullied. Clearly, I got the feeling he'd been bullied, but he stood up and he represented us. So, from that perspective, he comes across as one of the good guys. Now, the funny thing is, Morgan County is now turning into some of the good guys. Peggy Mayfield also voted no. So, that was a surprise. And I think there is a moderate element within the Republican Party in the state that is just, able to stand up and say no to the stupidity. And I think they're also covering their own backs as well politically. Now, tomorrow they could be doing something really stupid. We don't know. But at least for this, they were there and they represented us. And like Leslie said, we should call them and thank them. But it's taken a toll on them for sure.
Yeah. Now, Simon, you mentioned, and Leslie also mentioned, right, that we should be thanking these Republicans for doing the right thing on this occasion, and we should. But I guess let's not lose sight of the long term here. For all the celebration this week, and this was a win, but Indiana is still operating under a 7-2 gerrymandered map. Chuck, are we mistaking one tactical win for real reform? A symbolic win for progress? Hold comfort for change?
I think at the moment, partially. While I do applaud the senators for standing up and doing the right thing, we have to remember that the Republican House did the absolute opposite. So, to the case in point, that our own, the Indiana House of Representatives absolutely laid down for this mess. So, do I think that it's a short-term win? Yes. Do I think it's the long-term? Does it begin a long-term thought? Maybe. I think Simon hit it very accurately. I think there are cracks that are starting to show, but it's us, the people, that have to push the envelope forward. I mean, we're only going to achieve real success at the ground roots level, and if we don't stay engaged, if people do not stay engaged in the political process, then we're going to lose it just that much more. Because this isn't going to be the last time they try something like this. They've tried it once; it'll be tried again. The only way we can do it is by hopefully getting a bill or getting the. I have to back up. I heard a couple times during the. I think it was in the House of Representatives when they were doing all their speeches and all this stuff, talking about as long as, since Congress hasn't acted, we have to do what we have to do. There shouldn't be this gerrymandering, but it is what it is. Well, two wrongs don't make a bloody right. So, I think honestly, and right now Congress is paralyzed, for lack of better terminology, because they can't figure out what they're doing. But I think us as Hoosiers can sit there and say, look, we're not going to have this mess anymore. We need to have an independent agency, draw the congressional districts according to what makes sense for Indiana, not for what makes sense for any one political party. And I'll admit it, I'm saying it doesn't need to favor anybody. It needs to be even slate. That way the ideas and the policies can be evaluated by all, and the people can have their choice. And that's what it should be. The unfortunate part to all this is that in that whole statement that they have a bill in there to restrict ranked choice voting this legislative session. So
saw that. Yep.
And then, so there you go, that they're still trying to limit the power of the people to select who their choices are and how their choices move forward. So I think unless we do a complete, and I keep using this term, but a complete reset in the idea of saying, look, this kind of infighting, and this hits back to Leslie's point, we have to look at our collective good. What if we're not going to work together for the collective good of all of us? What are we doing? We're basically electing to go extinct, for lack of better terminology.
Correct.
I'm not sure I agree with the going extinct, because Indiana is holding the line, and it was the only state not to lose any Democratic seats in the 24 election. So as far as that, it's held the line, and this has been a win, for not getting redistricted again. But we are showing ourselves as somebody that is capable of stopping movement towards us, and it's just building up the momentum to push back. But so far we're holding the line. So if we get investment next year, then things should move forward.
About that, and I didn't have this in the show notes, Simon, but you mentioned investment, right? And yeah. Indiana has shown that we can stand up and organize, and as such, I want to say it's the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. Correct me if I'm wrong on which organization it is, but they're going to invest some money in Indiana.
Yeah, it's the Democratic Legislative Caucus Committee, I think.
Okay, yes.
And it's made up of congressional House leaders, in DC. But because they've seen where Indiana is standing, they can see that there's something happening in Indiana. They're not going to come and say, "Hey, you're a swing state now," but they are looking to come in and do exactly what we tried to do last year, which was break the supermajority in the House. So
right.
They haven't invested in Indiana, this is what I've been told, since 2014. So that
it has shown.
Yeah. Yes. And that lack of investment has shown the power being given away to the Republicans. So, we should see something next year, but if they only support 4 candidates, I'm going to be massively disappointed, because The Democrat Party in the state tried that last year, and they lost every candidate. And that's one of the reasons why the Indiana Rural Summit is trying to fill every seat so that every race is contested. Yes. And then next year, we're going to be following the Virginia Grassroots Coalitions method, which is literally getting every seat filled so it gives incentive for people to come out to vote. You know, even if you've got a whole bunch of people that are going to lose, the extra people that come out will generate, 1, 2, 3, 4% extra in each district or precinct. But the overall number that comes out, all of a sudden it's like, the statewide races you can own because you've got the momentum. And that was the big difference. They turned they flipped the governor's seat and the two below, and I can't remember which ones they were.
I don't remember at that time either, but
we know that we know this is possible, so that's the plan.
It's something, and I hope that I can get in touch with some of those Virginia organizers to maybe talk about how they did things and how Indiana can learn from it, and that's something I want to talk about in the coming months as we go forward. We are coming to the bottom of the hour here, to the halfway point of the show, so